there's a coyote walking down the trail towards me. And it must not have had its morning coffee or something because it did not notice me. I got within about 20 feet of it and I had to yell out, "Hey, hey." And it looked up at me and it was like, "Whoa, like, what are you doing here?" There's a guy wearing a bunch of blue with a red pack on.
They're waiting for
Um,
an anvil to fall on top of
yeah,
them like the
yeah, yeah.
Roadrunner would do.
Yeah. He's got all his gear from Acme Brick
You're
Company
right.
or whatever.
That's right.
Uh,
Welcome to the Greens and Blues Sports Center podcast. This episode, Zach starts low and ends high. I rue any and all willows. And we walk through a Sangre adventure where Zach goes solo. Well, Zach, today we're going to dig into a group of 13ers that you tackled in the Sangres earlier this past summer. But before we get into that, what's going on in your world?
oh, Eric, we just got back from a trip to Southern California.
Mm.
I had a little conference in San Diego. Decided to bring my family along, so they had fun while I had fun, but in very different ways.
Yeah.
For those of you that don't know, academic conferences are epically nerdy. We read papers to each other and then we ask questions.
Oh,
It's like
that's
going back to
fascinating.
school. Yeah. Everybody that I tell that's not an academic is like, what's the value in reading a paper to someone else? And it's like, well, at some point it may have actually been intended to be a presentation, but then we realized that we can't actually track an argument through an outline, so we have to write it down. Um, so yes, I went to a religion conference while my family they went to the San Diego Zoo and
Oh,
went to
man.
yeah, big time.
That place is awesome.
Apparently my wife captured a video of a panda goofing off and deciding to hang upside down from a tree.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
it was really cool. We went to the beach, went to La Jolla Beach, which is always great.
Mm.
And then the kicker was we wanted to take my daughter to Universal Studios Hollywood. So when my conference was over, we drove up to Los Angeles, where I lived for 6 years, and we went to Universal Studios. And the big one there, now you did it in Florida, but we did the California version of Harry Potter Land. That's not what it's
Yes.
called. It's called Hogsmeade, which is like the little town that you can go
Oh,
to.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Because the one in Florida is like Diagon Alley, right?
No, you're going back about 10 years on me. Maybe not that
Oh,
much, but yeah. There were a couple of stores you could get the nasty Jelly Bellies, the Harry Potter
yes.
version in a candy store kind of in an alleyway. So that's a good question. I forget where it was
Yeah.
at.
They had that. You could buy your own wand.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
for
Butterbeer.
butterbeer, which is actually pretty good.
It was good.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't want to know the list of ingredients, but it was good. And then that probably the coolest part and the part that my daughter just loved was there's a Harry Potter ride. So there's Flight of the Hippogriff, which is like a standard
Yes, we did the
roller
hippogriff.
coaster. But then there's a ride that you do that has like you're riding on a broom in 3D.
Yeah, like, is it a
And
4D ride where there's like
yeah,
water spraying at you and stuff?
yes, it's
Yeah.
4D, or like there's a
Mm-hmm.
dragon that like blows hot
Yes,
breath on
that's
you
right.
and
Yeah.
it feels like you're kind of flying on a broom. And
Mm-hmm.
probably the coolest part of that, I mean, that ride was a ton of fun, was that you get there and the line weaves through Hogwarts. And so while
Oh,
you're standing in line, they have put all this stuff for you to check out while you're in line.
no
So,
way.
like in the movies, the picture frames
Mm-hmm. They
talk,
move. Yeah.
they move. They have talking and moving picture frames inside the Hogwarts. They take you through like the Defensive Dark Arts classroom, through Professor Sprout's greenhouse.
Oh man, that's
I
super
mean,
cool.
it's really cool. And we got there super early. So for the first hour, we kind of had the place to ourselves.
Mm.
And then more and more people came, and by the end, it was like an hour long wait for the ride, but we'd
Mm.
already ridden it 4 times at that point. So so we had a ton of fun for that. That was a lot of fun. As families know, traveling anymore though is just not cheap.
No, for
Um,
sure.
it was I was kind of tallying up the budget and I was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I love traveling, but I kind of looked at it and I was like, we could have gone to Europe for this much.
Mm-hmm. I'm
Um,
sure.
and maybe we will next time. How does Paris sound?
Yeah.
So, yeah, how are you, Eric? What's going on in your world?
We're doing good. Yeah, it's pretty quiet in our neck of the woods. We have not been to California. Well, I've been to California for work recently, but did not get to go to SoCal or Harry Potter Land or anything like that. So
That's
we're
too bad.
it's yeah. Maybe next time I go, I'll have a side flight down to San Diego and visit Coronado or something like that. But
Oh, may I recommend going to Universal Studios on a day when it's 62 degrees and overcast? That
wow,
was perfect.
that sounds great.
Yeah.
Well, Zach, we are going to talk about a summer adventure you took to the Sangres. What peaks are we going to go through?
So these are two peaks that I did near the end of the summer. Near the end of the summer, I try to work up to some bigger hikes. And so this was a hike that I wanted to be big. The original intent was to do Fluted and Little Horn and Horn Peak. And I'll kind of describe the way to do it, but that was the original intent. I only did two of them. So spoiler alert, I only ended up doing Little Horn and Fluted. And those are the two peaks we'll talk about. I did them in August of this past year, so August of 2024. We've also had a listener write us and say that he was really excited for us to do this. And if anything, I aim to please. So I can relay my best information that I have and the little bit of wisdom that I have regarding these two peaks. But yeah, Little Horn and Fluted Peaks, they are north of the Crestone group in the Sangre de Cristos, just south of the Comanche Venable Loop with the Phantom Terrace. So it's the kind of the next little cluster of peaks south of there, just north of Mount Adams. Neat little group of peaks in the Sangres. And with all things Sangres, it means that your ascent is generally from lower down and it generally is quite steep and not gentle. And all that is preface for the story that follows here. So,
All righty. Well, we're looking forward to that. So, what initially drew you to want to tackle this group in particular?
a few things. These are pretty aesthetic peaks. So, Horn Peak in particular kind of looms above that West Cliff Valley
Yep.
if you're on the eastern side of the Sangres. These are really only, I mean, they are accessible from the west side. Their easiest access is from the east side. And Horn Peak in particular kind of looms above them. And then you look south of Horn Peak and there's Little Horn. I always like aesthetic peaks like that are kind of big pyramids that
Mm.
sit above valleys. That's always fun. The real allure for me though was the prospect of a big loop. So the original idea was to tag Little Horn, then Fluted, and then Horn Peaks in order and make a loop out of it. And to me, I love the aesthetics of a loop. I love the fact that I'm not repeating any ground.
It's efficient. Yep.
They're super efficient. I love long days on a ridge. I knew that I had a good weather window on this particular day, so I could be up high for long. And that really drew me. I kind of on the down low in my head have this idea of maybe hiking all the Sangre 13ers in a lifetime.
Ooh.
I've got a lot of work to do though if I want that to happen and I got to tackle some of the hard ones like Milwaukee Peak pretty soon if I'm going to do that. But all those things drew me to this peak and also because I'm coming from Oklahoma for
A little
people coming
closer.
yeah, a little closer, a little shorter drive in and then I could tackle these peaks. And that was also a lure here.
Got it. Okay, cool. How do you get to the trailhead, or are there multiple options trailhead wise as far as trying to go after these peaks?
So, if anyone's thinking about these peaks, I don't know how everybody else does research, but my first bit is I look at a map
Mm-hmm.
and then I go look at trip reports on 14ers.com and I go
Mm-hmm.
to the Climbing Coonies website and I look at what they've done. Oftentimes, the first stop for me is Laura Clark's trip reports. She's always good about being very thorough and posting her experiences. There are two starting points for these peaks. You can go from the north from the Comanche Venable trailhead, and there's actually a campground there that I'll talk about in a sec. And then from the south, you can go from the Horn Creek trailhead.
Yep.
Listeners note, it's a little confusing because the Horn Creek trailhead is actually it's closer to Little Horn Peak than it is to Horn Peak.
Yeah.
Which is I kept thinking, why is this Horn Creek? What's going on? It's Horn Creek trailhead is close to Little Horn, and Horn Peak it actually doesn't have Horn Creek underneath it. It has Dry Creek and another creek to the north of it. So don't ask me. I didn't make this stuff up. Um, so those are the two ways to get to it, and those are really easy to get to. Any passenger car can get to either trailhead quite
Okay.
easily. The Comanche Venable campground and the associated trailhead there is easily accessible with a passenger car, and so is the Horn Creek trailhead. Horn Creek trailhead might get a bit muddy if it rains really hard for a couple days. It's dirt and it's got some ruts in it, but you could still get there no problem. So really easily accessible on the Subi scale. That's a zero in my book. You could ride a bike or a scooter, or my neighbor who drives around in a BMW sports car that scrapes the speed humps could even probably make its way to the trailhead. That's the easiest way to get there, and probably the those are the two best ways. So for those of you that have passenger cars, these are fun ones to do.
So which way did you do?
So I did the Horn Creek trailhead,
Okay.
southeast of the loop. So if you look at the map, it's kind of like if you put the horseshoe of Little Horn, Fluted, and Horn on its
Hmm.
side. So that's going clockwise. If Little Horn is at the 6, Fluted would be at like between the 8 and the 9, and
Yeah.
Horn would be at noon. Then Horn Creek Trailhead would be just south and east of Little Horn Peak. And that's where I did it. I reviewed a bunch of trip reports, and I'm still not sure if this is the correct way. I don't know a better way. I decided that I wanted to do that loop clockwise,
Hmm.
starting with Little Horn and then to Fluted and then to Horn. And I wanted to ascend Little Horn first. So anyone doing route beta on these things is going to quickly encounter the fact that a bunch of people say that the ridge going up Little Horn is hard. There's a section in there that's some people say class 3, some people say class 2 plus, some people say difficult class 3. I wanted to do that first, and I prefer to ascend difficult terrain as opposed to descend it.
Yep. Agreed.
Um, and that was my choice. It also had a fair amount of bushwhack, and I feel like I should bushwhack when I've got energy in the morning and not when I'm worn down in the afternoon
Yeah.
and I'm just trying to get home. So
Yep.
I wanted to do it that way, and it's the way that Laura Clark had done it.
Okay. I was going to ask which way the trip reports had advised.
I'm going to go Laura Clark's way until a point, and then her and I are going to deviate at a certain point, and I'll say why. She ended up doing kind of what I did.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I started from Horn Creek Trailhead, and that brings, I guess, to the next point, which is places to camp.
Yep.
If anyone wants to, the Alvarado campground is just northeast of these. You can camp at the Alvarado campground. That's really nice. It's probably one of the nicer Forest Service campgrounds. I ended up just basically camping at the trailhead
Mm.
at Horn Creek. There's a bunch of places there for horses because I think they take a lot of horses on the Rainbow Trail and these kind of trails up into these high mountain lakes on the eastern Sangre. So there's a bunch of places there for horses. There's a few spots to put a tent down. I just slept in the back of my Subaru, as one does, and that was perfectly fine. But if people want to camp there, they can. It's not a Forest Service campground, so be polite, leave no trace. Probably don't make a big scene about pitching a tent there, and nobody will give you any trouble. But since that's where I was going from, that's where I decided to start from.
Got it. Well, do you want to get into the meat of your adventure?
Let's do the meat and the potatoes here. So yeah, I get up early in the morning. I'd been looking at this hike for a few years and I was pretty
Mhm.
excited. So got up early, I got going. What you basically do is you're going to hike up a kind of joiner trail that'll get you onto the Rainbow Trail. And then you'll be on the Rainbow Trail for like, oh, maybe a quarter mile, maybe even
Mm,
less than that.
okay.
And then very quickly after, you're going to go up Horn Creek. So as you're going up Horn Creek, you kind of start to see the foot of Little Horn Peak kind of coming out, the ridge extending out from Little Horn Peak. And so as I'm kind of walking west along that trail, slowly gaining altitude, I'm also looking to my right, to the north, seeing where I'm going to break off and kind of bushwhack up onto the ridge of Little Horn. I think if anyone looks at Laura Clark's trip report, I think I kind of found where she went. It's kind of like it's a low spot, a bit of a ravine in the terrain. I don't have GPX tracks, otherwise I would share them. If you look at Laura Clark's trip report, there's a picture in there that kind of shows it. But you're basically going to look for kind of a low spot in the ridge and then a little depression or creek coming down out of that.
Okay.
And that's where I broke north. And at that point, you're going to spend the rest of your day not on a trail anymore. And so I just started bushwhacking at that point and trying to gain the ridge. And that's probably where the hardest work of the day went in. In the beginning phases, there was a lot of litter and a lot of, not like trash, but like a
Yeah.
lot of deadfall. And so you're just kind of hopping over all that and you're avoiding it as best you can and just kind of slowly working my way towards the ridge, moving north and northwest all along and kind of finding this ridge line. Eventually, once you get on the ridge, there's a bunch of like game trails. There's probably enough people that have hiked this as a 13er. There's some social trails that have started to form
Okay.
in the
Yeah.
trees, but they don't always last very long. And sometimes they just go for a bit and then they fade, or sometimes they go and they split and then they reconvene. Just try to stay on the ridge as long as you can. That was probably the most tedious part of the hike. That ridge goes on for forever. I cannot emphasize this enough. It seemed endless. It's pretty wild too. I know I scared some elk off. I saw some elk butts running away from me. Probably the coolest thing. So I'm walking on one of these social trails and I'd kind of come to a slightly flatter spot. And this ridge is pretty steep for long stretches.
Mm.
And there's a coyote walking down the trail towards me. And it must not have had its morning coffee or something because it did not notice me. I got within about 20 feet of it and I had to yell out, "Hey, hey." And it looked up at me and it was like, "Whoa, like, what are you doing here?" There's a guy wearing a bunch of blue with a red pack on.
They're waiting for
Um,
an anvil to fall on top of them like the Roadrunner would do.
yeah, he's got all his gear from Acme Brick
You're right.
Company or whatever.
That's right.
Uh, yeah, he or she, I'm not sure which, like was pretty startled. And I don't like startling wildlife because I don't know if
Yeah.
what their fight or flight response is going to be.
Yep. Yep.
It kind of saw me and it was like, "Whoa, I need to get out of here." And it bolted off down the trail. And then about 30 minutes later, it must have gotten with some of its buddies and they started doing howls all up and down the valley.
Oh, wow.
Do though that kind of like call and response, like,
Hmm.
"Arr!" And then you hear
Yeah.
another group cackle up and another and another. It made the hike interesting. You're basically going to continue up this ridge, though, to varying degrees. It's always between 7 and 15% grade. So it's a pretty
Mm.
steady
That's, yeah.
butt kicker incline the
Yeah.
whole time. If you hike 13ers, you're used to that. But I was moving pretty well up there. And then there's a couple points where you top out on a hump and you could kind of see the way ahead.
Yep.
There's nothing special here. Just stay on the ridge and just keep going and going. And eventually you get to Timberline. And at Timberline, you can kind of stay a little bit to the south or the left, or you could stay on the ridge. The ridge is pretty steep right at Timberline. So I stayed a little bit to the south. And then I kind of started to make my way up towards the ridge proper because I knew that this so-called class 2, 3-ish section kind of lay ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So then at that point, I'm at Timberline or I'm above Timberline, and I've been reading about this dreaded ridge on Little Horn. Laura Clark described it as a class 3. A couple other people talked about it as a 3. Some other dude talked about it as like a class 2. I was able to keep it at difficult class 2 with
Okay.
careful route finding. Whenever I encountered difficulties, I was able to drop down on the north side of the ridge, and I pretty much always found a way across. And I went slowly, but it never got harder than a class 2 plus for me. It never felt too airy, and I never had to use my hands extensively. But I know had I gone other ways, it would have been class 3, and the other ways looked perfectly intuitive too. So there's no cairns,
Interesting.
there's no way to really know, but I think as a default, just staying to the right and being willing to drop down at various points made sure that I was always kind of in pretty good shape.
So you
Um,
consistently stayed on the north side, and you feel like that kept you in kind of two plus territory, as opposed to maybe the ridge proper or the south side, which may have been a bit more difficult. Is that kind of what you found?
yeah, South Side is a negative Ghost Rider. There's a point where you kind of top out, like the trail or the ridge makes sure that you get to this kind of point where you can kind of see the south side.
Okay.
And the south side looks gnarly for this section. Like there's some cliff bands there. Either stay on the ridge proper or keep, if you're comfortable with class 3 and you just want to, if you want
Spice
to
it up.
spice it up, go for it. But if you want to be picky like I was, being solo, and I also thought I had the full day ahead of me.
Mm.
And so I thought, I'm going to just keep it as easy as I can. And it ended up being really pleasurable scrambling. I quite enjoyed it. And once you're through that, you're kind of a hop, skip, and a jump from the top of Little Horn. And for me, I get to Little Horn and I'm like, all right, I'm banging on here.
Feeling good?
That's where I was feeling pretty good. But I got to say, the bushwhack took it out of me.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, as you'll recall, Eric, we had to do an acclimating episode.
Indeed.
And we did an acclimating episode after I did this hike. And so there's a reason for that. And it's because I was kind of feeling it a little bit. Had I been up in Colorado for a couple more days, I think it would have been fine.
Mm.
But a mere 14 hours earlier, I was at basically sea level.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm pushing it at 13,000 feet. And I was like, okay, I'm a little tired. But usually what happens is I put some food in me and I descend for a minute, work the hate out of the legs for a minute, and then I get going back up fluted. And so that's kind of what happened. I ate a little bit, sent a text to my wife, and then I was like, all right, I'm on to fluted now. The traverse across to fluted is long.
Mm.
I don't think the map really shows how long. It's tedious, but it's not hard. So I worked my way across that and I kept trying to stay on the ridge proper. And I think that was a mistake. I think there's a certain point where you have to admit defeat and just drop off the ridge
Mm.
and this time you drop off the ridge to the south side.
Okay.
The north side does not look pretty in that section. The south side's a little more gentle and grassy. It's all really steep. Both sides are, but it's not treacherously steep. I should have admitted defeat and dropped off the ridge, but I didn't. Stayed on the ridge, so that meant I was up there a little longer.
Okay.
Um, It's when I started to go up Fluted Peak where I was like, okay, the Holy Ghost has left me. Like my legs did not have the spirit in them anymore. And my legs are getting
Oh,
tired. And so
oh.
I worked my way up Fluted, and Fluted is just straightforward, right? Stay on the ridge or just a little to the south of the ridge as you're going up Fluted. Fluted's a couple 100 feet higher than Little Horn. There's nothing technical about it. It's got grassy slopes, but they're steep, grassy slopes.
Mm,
If you want to go on the north side, you'll need climbing equipment because it's pretty steep over there.
mm.
I just got tired. And by the time I got to the top of Fluted, I was doing the UFC tap out. I was like, okay, I'm beat here.
You
I
still got to get
still
back after that too.
Well, you know me though. I'm looking over at Horn Peak and I'm like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
up here, but dang, that traverse from Fluted to Horn is long.
That one
And
looks super long. If
it's a
the others are long, I can't imagine how long the one from Fluted to Horn is.
it's a good couple miles, I think.
Oh my gosh.
I had the weather. My weather window was good. I was dialed in like in terms of like my mindset,
Mm-hmm.
but the body was giving me a lot of feedback in that moment. It was like, no, uh, you're too tired for this, man.
Mm.
And so then at that point, I had to make a decision. Do I go back the way I came? Or there is a way, and it looked attractive at the time, and I still contend that it was somewhat attractive to just drop off the southeast kind of slope or face of Fluted Peak into the Horn Creek Basin.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's what I decided to do because honestly, I was tired enough that I didn't want to do that traverse again and I didn't want to
Mm.
reascend Little Horn. When in doubt, you go back the way you came.
Yeah.
I was just like, I'm going to drop off this. I looked at the map and it didn't look like the contour lines were too close together. I'd been kind of watching it as I had been doing the traverse and it went. I knew that it would go. There was a moment where I thought, oh, maybe I'll drop onto the ridge that connects Fluted and Adams. And you could go down that for a little ways.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I thought, oh, I'll do that and I'll drop into another basin there because maybe I'll get to see some stuff. But I didn't know what lie on the other side of that. So I was
Mm-hmm.
like, no. By the way, if anyone's ever thinking of it, the second half of that Fluted to Adams Ridge is gnarly. It looks like a saw blade. It's got a lot of junk on it and it does not look fun. And I remember Justin Simoni mentioning how rough that was on his
Mm.
traverse. But so I made the call to drop off a Fluted Peak. If I was better acclimated, I think I would have tackled Horn, but I didn't. So then began a really tedious descent. The descent in terms of route finding was not hard. It's just really steep. And there's a section where you hit some steep bit that's on not gravel, but kind of loose scree-ish
Uh-huh.
rock.
Yeah.
Descended off that, eventually got to some little ponds beneath, and the ponds beneath are just surrounded by willows.
Oh no.
Yeah, and I was just like, well, I can go around. It was pretty boggy to go around it, and I kind of knew where I was headed because I had seen it from above. I was like, I want to go straight south from here,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that will intersect me with the Horn Creek Trail, and it eventually did. But to get straight south, I had to basically slog through some really crappy willows.
Oh my gosh.
And you know how much I love stomping through willows. so uh um so it kind of sloshed through a bunch of willows and then actually headed a little south and west, kind of ultimately away from the trail because I found a little trail that led out of this pond.
Okay.
And it was probably a game trail that some hikers had used, maybe some backpackers had used to get to these ponds, which are quite nice. And that eventually, after about a half mile to three-quarters of a mile, just kind of walking through the woods and just kind of orienting south and west a little bit, put me onto the Horn Creek Trail.
Okay.
But that descent, so if we're talking beta for people listening to this, I think the way I went up was the best way. My descent route was steeper than steep.
Okay.
Or
It
rather,
looks like it
here,
on the topo.
yeah, I'll put it this way. If you want to go up the way I did, you've got bushwhacking.
Mm.
If you want to go up my descent route, which is basically between fluted and Little Horn, but closer to fluted, up from some ponds there,
Yep.
it's steep. It is really steep. You'll see a couple cliff bands, and you go kind of in between these two cliff bands. That's how I descended. That's how you would ascend. What took me that whole traverse to ascend, you would have to do in the space of a half mile, essentially. So you would have a really easy approach to this pond, and then you would just have to ascend up Fluted Peak. I don't think I really recommend that. I think the way I did it was the best way, but saying it's the best way does not mean it's the easy way.
Mm.
The easy way is to have a friend steal a helicopter and drop you on top. Uh, but um, I have a friend that's a helicopter pilot, so
Oh.
maybe one day we can work that out. But yeah, in terms of doing it, I think there's two really good ways to do it. A, the way I did it, or B, you go up Horn Peak first and you're really
Hmm.
fit and you're healthy and active and you're acclimated and you snag Horn Peak and then you do the reverse
You go
of
counterclockwise.
counterclockwise on the horseshoe,
Hmm.
go Horn Peak, Fluted Peak, and then you just know that your descent off of Little Horn, you're going to have to do route finding on a descent,
Uh-huh.
and then you're going to bushwhack your descent. But bushwhacking on a descent is easier than bushwhacking on an ascent.
Mm.
So that's your trades. And then basically, I was home free. I'm on an easy trail. I'm hiking out. There's families going up to these lakes for the day, and I'm seeing them, and they're like, "Where have you been?" And I'm like, up there." Um, so the hike out was actually long, and it really reminded me how long that traverse was. It
Mm.
was probably a 5 mile hike out, and I was like, "Dang,
Wow.
I covered some ground today." So the hike out was very straightforward, and it delivered me at my car. All in all, it was probably about a 12-hour hike, or maybe a little less than that, about 11 hours. And I think I did about 14 miles. So Laura Clark, when she did it, she did an out and back. She just did Little Horn, then fluted, and then she reascended Little Horn, and then she was returned.
We went back the way she came. Okay.
Went back the way she came. She's in better shape than I am, so I can see why she did that. She rightly recognized too, though, if you read her report, that going over to Horn was that was going to make the day a much longer day.
It looks like a super long day. Like you're not even back for dinner. You're back for like a midnight snack after all that.
Yeah, so I orphaned Horn Peak. I didn't like doing that. I hate doing that, but Horn Peak actually has a trail that goes a fair ways up it. So I will
Mm.
go back maybe this summer or next and finish that off. But it was one of those days where I felt like I had failed a little bit.
Mm.
Even though I had summited two peaks.
Yeah. Yep.
And for someone that's coming up from 1,000 feet, that's pretty darn good.
Oh yeah.
But I really wanted to get that third peak in. And I really felt like if I had been just a little bit more acclimated, I could have done it. But as people know, bushwhacking is hard.
It is hard.
And
Going up or going down through willows, either way.
yeah, yeah, going up through Willow, and I was going up through a lot of deadfall and,
Yep.
just I think when you bushwhack too, you're never taking a straight line.
Hmm.
You're
Yep.
always weaving
You're
and
weaving through it. Yep.
you're adding a lot of mileage that way. So if I had to do it all over again, I would have add in a day of acclimation or do an easier hike and then come back and do this one.
Okay. Well, so that's the tough news. What's the good news? Like, what was positive coming out of this? What did you enjoy most out of this hike?
Oh man, I really like seeing that coyote. That was great. Three things. First is solitude. I did not
Mm.
see a soul until I descended and got onto the Horn Creek Trail at the end of the day. You are likely not going to see anyone if you're out for solitude. This is your hike. Anytime you
Mm.
get off the beaten path like that, you're going to see more wildlife than you do people. That was really nice. The second thing is that once you hit this ridge on Little Horn, you've got just unfolding views for the rest of the day.
Mm.
And To the south, you see the Crestone group and the Needles, and those look awesome.
Mm,
And Mount Adams looks awesome from there. And to the north, you see Horn Peak and Comanche Venable and Rito Alto and Marcy and all those peaks kind of unfolding above you. And it's like, that is a cool spot. And the third is the challenge. It's a good place to push yourself if you're really wanting to work on route finding with class 2, 3 stuff. That's a good thing to do. I really enjoyed the technical aspect of it of like
mm,
route finding in the trees and route finding on the ridge and thinking on the fly. There's no mistake you're going to make here that's going to be grievous. So
mm.
that's good. All those things. And of course, it's a day in the mountains, man.
That's that's right.
Like, what can be too wrong?
Well, so it's rating time, Zach.
Yes.
Time to figure out what you would rate for. Let's start with difficulty. How difficult was this hike overall? You mentioned a couple of sections that were maybe a little tougher than the rest of it, but what would you give for an overall rating?
I would say two plus.
Okay.
Um, and
There's enough of
for
that.
there's enough of it. And I would say that the route finding also presents a plus part of
Mm.
it. It's sustained enough on that ridge where you are having to make decisions for about an hour,
Oh, wow.
um,
Okay.
or 45 minutes to an hour. And I think I just got lucky. I made a bunch of good decisions. But if you make a quote unquote bad decision, you'll definitely feel that it lingers at a low class 3
Okay.
for little stretches there. And if you want to push it, you can keep it that way for a little bit. So I would say class 2 plus for sure. And if you stay on the ridge between Little Horn and Fluted, you can keep it 2 plus too. I would say for sure 2 plus for this. And maybe other people have rated it kind of 3 for a little section there as well.
Okay. It sounds like the grunt on this one might be a little on the higher side. What would you rate this hike on the grunt factor?
Oh, this, I don't know. Are we going 0 to 5 or 0 to 10?
Uh, let's go 0 to 10.
Okay, 0 to 10, or maybe to 11.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
This one goes to 11.
I would give this. I mean, it's so hard to separate that out from my physical condition at the time. So, I mean, I'm going to say a 7.
Okay,
Um,
yeah.
on a maybe a slightly better day, it could be a 5 or a 6. Some people may debate me and be like, no, it's an 8, but it felt like it was hard.
Hmm.
And the distance, I know I sound like a broken record here, but about the Sangres, every mountain range is different. Like the Elks have crappy rock. The
Hmm.
Sawatch has two faces of every mountain that are easy and one that is just a scree field nightmare. The Gore is long and bushwhacky.
Hmm.
The Sangres are just straight up. Like you always start low. You're going to start this one at 8,600 feet. So it's a lot of elevation gain and loss.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that much gain.
Yeah. Yeah, you're going to put in some work. And the trails in the Sangres are rocky. There's
Hmm.
a lot of cobble in the trails, even if it's a trail. So, yeah, it's just grunty is
Hmm.
probably the best way to describe a lot of Sangre hikes.
Hmm.
You're going to put
Okay.
in some work more than you would say in the Sawatch or some of the
Hmm.
easier 13ers in, say, the San Juans that can be really, or the Lagaritas, which can be really gentle.
Hmm.
So, yeah, a little more difficult in terms of efforculty, as Jerry Roach would say.
Yep. Well, so what's the reward factor? Like you mentioned some of the views going down to like the Crestones and Adams down there, and how pretty was that view?
I mean, if we're going on a scale of like a 10 being middle of the San
Mm.
Juans and
Yeah,
surrounded by a sea of peaks, and a 0 being
out my
uh,
front window,
yeah,
my driveway.
traffic jam in Los Angeles at 5 in the evening. I mean, this is for people that like the Sangres, they like that long ridge with those really impressive kind of sharp peaks.
Mm.
It's great. But you're not surrounded, right? You've got valley on both sides of you. So
Mm.
this is more like a 6 or a 7 on that scale. It's
Okay.
beautiful. The views to the Crestones are cool. And that's always fun to see. On the Sangres, all these little valleys hold lakes in them, and that's really
Mm.
neat too.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely rewarding in that regard.
Okay. So my favorite part of any time we talk about a peak or peaks, my favorite part is Zach. If these peaks were a song, what song would they be?
Well, Barbara, um,
I'm Hugh Downs.
Babs. Um, so since I'm a blues guy, one of my favorite, I don't think I've said this on the podcast, one of my favorite musicians is a guy named Albert Collins.
Mm.
He's kind of funny. If anyone has seen probably the best pop culture reference to Albert Collins, if you've seen Adventures in Babysitting with
Oh man,
with
yeah.
the inimitable Elizabeth Shue taking a bunch of kids into downtown Chicago, there's a scene there where they sing the babysitting blues, and the guy playing the guitar there and singing is Albert Collins.
Oh wow.
And he's got some great tunes. I Ain't Drunk, I'm Just Drinking, Master Charge, about his wife getting a charge card. But the song that immediately came to mind for this one was he wrote a song called I'm Too Tired. And the chorus is I'm too tired for anything. That's how I felt when I got to the top of Fluted. If someone would have offered me to lay down a sleeping bag right at that moment and just take a nap, I so would have taken him up on it.
Oh
So
man, you could have pulled a Justin Simone. He's kind of
yeah,
laying on top of a summit and
just
sleeping for a bit,
just bivvy it.
eh? Yeah.
Yeah. So Too Tired by Albert Collins. Everybody cue it up. Gary Moore of Thin Lizzy fame, and then
Mm,
he had a solo career after that. Also did a great cover of Albert Collins, Too Tired. So,
that's awesome. I'm gonna have to look that up, and I may have to look up that scene in Adventures in Babysitting. It's only been about 30 years since I think I've seen that one.
oh, it's great. He's so funny the way he plays a Telecaster and the way he kind of like
Mm,
he always play these real truncated notes, and then he'll just like ba da da da. I got these babies sitting blues. He's great. So yeah, that's fun. Everybody should look up that clip,
that's
and
awesome.
we get to see a bunch of little kids and Elizabeth Shue sing the blues.
Who wouldn't want to see that, huh? That's
Worth the price of admission.
uh well, I know the song section is one of your favorites. I know another one
Mm.
of your favorites is food. Where is good to eat after a grunty hike like this?
Let me do something first. Let me throw some shade.
Uh-oh.
Um, the town of Walsenburg. If anyone knows of a good place to eat in Walsenburg, they need to send it to us because I have not found one.
I think it's just Taco Bell, isn't it? Is that all they got?
And even that's bad. And there's like it's like one of those combo
It
KFC
is,
Taco
yeah,
Bell,
like
and
the
then there's like an
A&W, yeah.
A&W next to it.
Yeah.
And even that, I've never even gotten good food at those.
Uh,
I mean, on this one, I have to admit, I got a big order of McNuggets in Trinidad and an extra large fry, and I was like, I got carbs, I got fat, and I got salt. I'm good.
good for now,
Um,
yep.
but a place I haven't mentioned before in Westcliff, there's a place called Chappie's.
Okay.
They make great burgers. They got a big wood burning grill and they have good burgers. I've had a cider there, so they've got ciders. That's a fun place to eat. It'll give you your proper fats after a hike. So I would say Chappie's, but really, Walsenburg, you need to elevate your game and have one place that's worth eating. Um, like so after this hike, I'll say this too. I decided, oh, I'm gonna go camp out near Taos, and I
Mm.
wanted to like cook out a steak, and there was a thunderstorm, so I go to the supermarket in Walsenburg, and there had been a lightning strike somewhere nearby, so the power was out in the supermarket.
Oh, wow.
I couldn't even get food like of any sort
Oh,
in
wow.
Walsenburg. So yeah, not feeling the love for the Berg right now.
Well, hopefully the mayor of Walsenburg does not listen to our podcast, and or maybe they do, and they get the hint that we gotta step up the food game.
Gotta lure some businesses down there.
There you go.
Maybe your crepe place in Breckenridge can
You move
start a
down there.
franchise in Walsenburg.
There you go. Chappies, you mentioned in Westcliff. They got any green chili there? on their cheeseburgers?
Ooh, I don't know. I had like a bacon burger there a couple years ago, but that's a good question.
Hmm.
If anyone knows, tell us.
Yeah, I'll call them and just randomly
Just
ask.
cold call.
Yeah, just,
Hey, do y'all have green chili?
yeah.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Hang
Thank
up.
you. Yeah. Do you want to Uber Eats it to your house? No, I'm good.
Nope.
I'm just
Nope, I'm good.
asking,
Just for reference.
just curious. Yeah.
Yeah, just curious.
Well, Zach, do you have anything else you want to share about your epic Sangre adventure here?
I just want to continue to spread the love for unknown hard 13ers. And if anyone wants to get into 13ers, do it. These are rewarding peaks. It was so fun to think about my hike just a few months ago and kind of go back and look at my pictures and stuff.
Yeah.
There's always surprises. And yeah, that's all I have to add to Little Horn and Fluted. I'm coming back for you, though, Horn Peak.
You're laying it down
This
now,
is
eh?
not over. It's like Mr. T.
Yeah.
What is your prediction? Pain.
Well, pain for you or for Horn Peak? Which one
Oh,
is it gonna
Horn
go?
Peak is going down. No more orphaned peaks. This
Oh
is
gosh.
so yeah. My overall take was actually the entire acclimating episode, where it was like, please learn from my mistakes. I I was not in shape for this peak, and I regret that.
Oh.
Do you have
Well,
anything to add, Eric, at the end of this? I just talked a lot, so
oh, this was a lot of fun. It was cool to hear your stories. It always stands out to me when talk about like willows and bushwhacking. Like, I don't like exposure at all. You know that. A very, very close second, as far as least favorite parts of any hike, has got to be willows. I
don't you know it?
and going down them, like that's, oh my gosh, I can't imagine. You almost dissuaded me from wanting to hike these peaks when you described that descent, because I thought, oh, I wouldn't want to do that. But
Uh, we'll
you
just have to
you
do them together, and I'll take the lead again. And
that's right. Yeah,
I can sing "Too Tired" by Albert Collins
that's
while we stomp through
right.
the willows.
And I'll just traipse through and skip along and be like, this is easy.
This
This
is
is
easy when
great.
somebody cuts a path for you.
What's he complaining about?
Well, Eric, if readers want to request other peaks that we talk about and maybe have actually hiked, where can they reach us?
We would love to hear from everyone at our email address, greensandbluespodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on our Facebook group. You can find us on our YouTube channel. You can find Zach. So you had an X account, and maybe
I,
you still do, but you have another account you just opened, yeah?
I still do have an X account that's NM Hiker Person, and then
Mm-hmm.
Blue Sky, it's just Zach Simpson,
Hey, perfect.
early adopter. Yeah, so any of those are good ways to find, or you could just Google us, and I'm sure you'll end up with one of us. But
Yep.
yeah, please reach out. It's always great to hear from you guys.
Yep. We love it. And you even mentioned before, Zach, that a listener actually
Hmm.
wrote to us about fluted and little horn and wanting to hear your experiences on those peaks. So that helped inspire this episode in the first place. So yeah, we love to hear from our listeners, and when we can give feedback like this. So
Yeah, yeah, we booted a whole other episode just for this
that's
one.
we
So,
did well, maybe even a couple. Yeah.
and speaking of Eric, what do we have to look forward to in our next episode?
So in our next episode, Zach, and we'll see if this is one or maybe this stretches into two episodes, but we're going to go through the first 14er experiences that you and I each had in Colorado.
Excellent. Well, a good way for you to relay a fun day in the mountains, and a good way for me to relive childhood trauma.
I don't know if mine was much better, actually.
Adult trauma.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you again in a couple weeks.